This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Roger McEowen, K-State and Washburn law professor, begins today's show as he explains the key provisions for farmers and ranchers from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Keeping the show moving is Kansas 4-H statewide shooting sports specialist Chandra Plate as she discusses the shooting sports projects in Kansas 4-H and what it means to youth. The Beef Cattle Institute's Cattle Chat podcast with Brad White, Bob Larson, Phillip Lancaster, and special guest Billy Brown ends the show as they converse about Clostridium Prefingens, Type C and D. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Wednesday show talking about the One Big Beautiful Bill Act with K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen. Roger, thanks for joining us today.
Well, good to be with you again, Shelby.
Roger, we've talked a lot about the One Big Beautiful Bill, but when did it go from being the One Big Beautiful Bill to being the One Big Beautiful Bill Act?
Well, when the president signed it into law on July 4th, so just a few days ago, really, and it became officially an act, and so now it's a law, and we know what we're dealing with.
And what are some of the biggest tax provisions we see in it for farmers and ranchers?
I think there's 3 or 4 of these. Of course, on the business side of things, the depreciation provisions are huge. We get restored 100% bonus, first-year bonus depreciation effective for qualified assets placed in service on or after January 19 of this year, and that is huge in terms of asset purchases and farm machinery manufacturers, those types of things. That's really going to drive and stimulate more asset purchases. And that would apply to a lot of farm assets. It applies to property that has a 20-year maker's life or less. And accompanying with that, we got an increase in the Section 179 write-off. The off-the-top allowance now goes to $2.5 million, and the phase-in kicks in at $4 million of qualified purchases. So once I have enough qualified purchases to get over the $4 million amount, I lose $1 of that $2.5 million write-off for every dollar I'm above $4 million in my purchases. Again, big deal for farmers. Another one that's huge out there is the qualified business income deduction. That's a 20% deduction off your business income. And so for a farmer, let's say they have $300,000 of farm income, that's a $60,000 deduction right there. So you put those 3 together, those are really big for many farmers that are out there. And of course, what was retained, it wasn't going to sunset, but what we had put in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act starting in 2018 was a 21% corporate tax rate, and that stays. So we have a really good tax structure right now for business, and you're seeing this reflected in the stock market. We're sitting at all-time highs on the stock market right now. We've got the trade numbers coming in from tariffs, and that has exceeded all the economists' gloomy forecasts about that. Now, I was one in the past, and it's in my writings, that said this would not be inflationary, and it has indeed not been inflationary. So we got a pretty good business setting for our farmers, and then in the OBBBA, we've got a farm bill.
And what's in the farm bill?
Well, we've got. I want to focus on the commodities title, but basically we've got farm policy in place through 2031 and the 2031 crop year. And when you look at this, what they've done, if we go through this kind of sequentially, this is Subtitle C. Well, it's actually the commodity subtitle of the bill, which is in Title I, and then you get into the various subtitles of that. They've got the nutrition subtitle that's in there, but if we look at commodities in Subtitle C, the reference prices for the major crops, the covered crops, have gone up significantly, and that's important because the payments, government payments, whether it's ARC or PLC, those payments are based on an effective reference price, which is based on a formula. And under the revised formula, the minimum price is set at 88% of the Olympic average price for the previous 5 years, and the maximum price can't exceed 113% of the statutory reference price. Now, that's higher than where we had been. And then the reference prices for the major commodities has been raised 11 to 21% across the board. Some are lower, others are higher, but they're all between 11 and 21% higher. So what that does is it increases the floor. So if the market price for commodities drops and it hits that floor, then you're going to get a payment. So they've raised the floor, which means they've increased the safety net. The reference price for corn is $4.10, wheat $6.35, soybeans is $10, and those are going to be the big ones in Kansas. And there's an annual escalator of 0.5% starting with the 2031 crop year, and that is capped at 113% of the new baseline, which is that original statutory reference price. And a couple other big ones with respect to that is that this year producers are going to get the higher of their ARC or PLC. No matter how they're signed up, they can get the higher of the two. And then starting next year with ARC, if they're getting ARC, ag risk coverage, if that's the way they're getting their payments, they can also get supplemental coverage option, which is a boost on crop insurance, which previously they'd not been eligible to do that. That if you're getting payments by ARC, you weren't eligible for SCO, and that starts next year. So really big stuff with respect to reference prices.
And while we're thinking about ARC and PLC, also a change when it comes to base acres?
Oh, this one is huge, too. This is a one-time voluntary opportunity for farmers as a whole to enroll up to 30 million new base acres based on their 2019 to 2023 planting history. This starts with the 2026 crop year. So the 2025 ARC and PLC are going to be continued to be based on the producer's current base acres with that increase starting with the 26 crop year. And there's a formula that's involved in terms of how many base acres are increased and then how the payments are going to be adjusted in accordance with that. But bottom line is the way this works for people to understand this is if base acres go up, that means you've got more acres that are eligible for payments, and with the reference prices going up, that's going to put more cash in farmers' pockets.
And another thing from this act, what about payment limits?
A big change here on payment limits. Historically, Shelby, any time that the farming operation is structured in any type of structure that limits liability, then you're only entitled to one payment limit. Now, the general payment limit has been $125,000 per person. So if I have an entity that limits liability, I get one person determination. So if you and I are in, for example, a C corporation together and we qualify for $125,000 of ARC or PLC payments, we split those. If we're 50-50 owners, we're going to split that $125 between us. We don't get two payment limits in that situation. That's changed under this legislation, because they create something known as a qualified pass-through entity. So there's been a number of us, and I've been one included, that's been pushing for this for quite some time, that we need to make the payment limitation rules match the tax rules. So if we have a pass-through entity, that should be treated like a pass-through entity for payment limitation purposes, meaning there should not be any one-person payment limit put in place just simply because you've got an S corporation that limits liability but passes the income through to the individual shareholder, or you've got an LLC that's treated tax-wise as a partnership, for instance. When I first started out practicing, one of the things that I was involved with was structuring farming operations to maximize farm program payments and working around that limitation. Well, that limitation's gone now, finally. And that's going to simplify things from an estate planning standpoint. That makes things easier, and it lines things up with the way we do, the way these entities are treated from a tax standpoint. So that is big. That's a big development.
Do farmers and ranchers need to worry about anything sunsetting in this act?
Well, these provisions are generally good through 2031, and then it'll change. So we've got some time here to work with this. So it's not like we're up against a one-year authorization and we're going to do that and then reauthorize it again. This is policy that's set for a period of time now. So that's pretty good. From a planning standpoint, I think this helps. And as I talk to CPAs and attorneys that represent farm clients, this really helps the planning horizon because we've got the policy set in place that's going to be here for a while. It would take an act of Congress to change it. And, of course, they can always do that. But once this gets in place like this, they're not going to change it. So we know where we're headed from a farm policy standpoint for a number of years.
As you've talked through a bunch of different things today from this act, what are the key points you really want to hit home for farmers and ranchers and those helping farmers and ranchers?
I think the key point here is that the Congress has really strengthened the safety net by increasing those reference prices, by giving them this year the hire of ARC and PLC, and by some changes with respect to crop insurance too, which we didn't talk about, but they've made some changes there, and an important change in the adjusted gross income computation. Now machinery gains will count as farm income, and that is a very important change. I was in a group of about 4 of us that had been pushing for a number of years on FSA to get that done, and they had refused. Well, Congress is now forcing their hand, and that's important because once you clear a 75% threshold with 75% or more of your adjusted gross income coming from farming income, then there's a couple of other limitations that drop off. And that's going to be very big because now a lot of farmers will have income from the trading of farm equipment, which is now treated as a sale on Form 4797 under TCJA. So they've corrected that problem. But bottom line, safety net has been enhanced, and this is a lot of dollars going into the sector, probably somewhere between $50 and $60 billion have been specifically tied to that farm safety net. And that's a big deal.
Roger, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Shelby.
That was K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen. I will link his article that he wrote on this topic in today's show notes on agtoday.net, or you can also find it by going to agmanager.info. We're cutting to a short break now, but stick around because we have more for you up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show talking about shooting sports with Kansas 4-H statewide shooting sports specialist, Chandra Plate. Chandra, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm pretty excited to get to share with you about Kansas 4-H shooting sports.
Chandra, can you share with us what shooting sports are in Kansas 4-H as projects?
Yes, we have 10 4-H projects in Kansas for 4-H shooting sports, and on a nationwide basis, we also have 10 4-H projects. So the 10 4-H projects that we have are archery, and in archery in Kansas, we do both compound archery and recurve archery. And then we have air pistol, air rifle, BB gun, hunting skills, muzzleloader, pistol, rifle, shotgun, Western Heritage, and those are our 10 4-H projects. For pistol and rifle, those are both small bore pistol and small bore rifle.
How many youth are involved in Kansas 4-H shooting sports?
We have a lot of youth in Kansas enrolled in 4-H shooting sports. We have a total of 6,018 project enrollments for 4-H shooting sports. And in the one that we have the most youth in right now is archery. We have 1,355 youth who are enrolled in archery. And like I said, in archery, depending on the county, you'll need to ask whether they shoot compound or recurve or both and what they have practices for. Then we have 394 youth in air pistol, 677 in air rifle. In BB gun, that's the second highest enrollment, which you can imagine that BB gun is a fun place for everybody to start. 1,192 enrollments. And hunting skills, which is a really fun project because hunting skills combines a lot of your natural resources, wildlife habitat, wildlife ID, and also includes archery and shotgun and rifle, small bore rifle. And so hunting skills is a really unique project, and it focuses on hunting ethics and being able to know those ethics and make those decisions. Part of the national contest in hunting skills is they'll shoot a picture up on the wall, and the youth have to decide whether that's a safe shot or not in a matter of seconds. And so, again, hunting skills is unique, and there's a lot of knowledge base that is required for that, and so they do a lot of studying as well as shooting. So, and then there's muzzleloader, which that's one of the projects I'm not certified in, but I've gotten to do it, and it is a blast. So anyway, I think just about everyone I know that has tried muzzleloader at one of our trainings or practices gets hooked really right away. And muzzleloader has 162 youth. Pistol has 223. Rifle has 383. Shotgun has 1,074 youth. That's the third highest enrollment that we have in a shooting sport. And we have a lot of youth who compete on a statewide basis at our state competition in the fall. And also then we have Western Heritage. And Western Heritage kind of goes along with the idea of cowboy shooting. Western Heritage is the 1860 through 1910 firearms, and the youth get to pick a persona. They have to learn the history from that time period. They get to tell the story of the person that they're representing. And then there's also the shooting that's involved. And so that's a really fun project as well. It's a newer project at Kansas. We just started this a few years ago. And so we only at this point have 163 youth involved in that project because it takes leaders to do projects. And each training, you can only train in one discipline per training for volunteer leaders. So.
And what important aspect do volunteer leaders play when it comes to shooting sports?
So our volunteers are super trained. The volunteers come to a training for an entire weekend. We start, generally, most of the time, we start at 8 o'clock on Saturday morning. Sometimes we start on Friday evening, depending on the discipline and what's involved. But we start at 8 o'clock on Friday or Saturday morning, and we normally end about 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock on Saturday night. And then we go again on Sunday from 8 till 4. And there is training not only on the particular discipline you're coming in, because you can only train in one discipline. So you have to pick, like, I'm doing archery, or I'm doing hunting skills, or I'm doing muzzleloader. So you have to pick a project, and that is then the only project that you can teach when you come back out. Someone who's trained in small bore or in rifle cannot teach muzzleloading. Someone who's trained in air rifle cannot teach air pistol. So that is how we do our trainings. So these people put in a lot of hours before they even ever get to see a youth. But the main important thing, number one, is always safety with us. Number two is always youth development. And so we want to train them, and we do train them in youth development. So they get quite a few hours of youth development training at those trainings as well. And so we normally partner the youth development portion with right after the meals, so that they're able, as they come back together in the big group, they have that experience together as we talk about how you not only teach firearm safety, but you also teach this youth to grow into a great adult. And so we talk about life skills. We talk about the essential elements of youth development, which are belonging, mastery, independence, and generosity. We talk about how those are foundational to what we do in 4-H shooting sports and how each youth needs to belong to that. In Kansas, we have currently 893 volunteer leaders who are certified in disciplines. And we also, in order to stay certified, our leaders have to update every 7 years or when the national curriculum changes. This project started in 1980. And so in 45 years of this project, we have not had many accidents. We've had 7 reportable accidents that None of them was fatal, and none of them was life-changing for a youth. And so 4-H shooting sports is very safe, and the way we keep it that way is every leader is trained the same way throughout the nation. I must mention this, not every county in Kansas has 4-H shooting sports. So if you're interested, you'll need to contact your local extension office and find out who does have, or if they do have 4-H shooting sports. And if they don't, you can inquire of the counties around you as well to see if they do as well. And again, the focus is youth development here. We want to grow great adults. It matters more to us that these youth grow up to have to be contributing citizens in their communities than it does that they are sharpshooters. We do have some sharpshooters in the program, and we have competitions that we have local, state, and national competitions that are available to those shooters if they qualify. And so, again, we can use that competition to help grow great adults too, but that is not the focus of 4-H shooting sports.
Chandra, you've mentioned youth, and what value have you seen shooting sports play in the life of youth?
So in 2024, I sent out a survey to 4-H shooting sports youth, and 100% of those youth who responded said that they feel like they belong in 4-H shooting sports. That in and of itself is huge, because we know that belonging is one of those foundational aspects of youth development. We also had 95.45% that felt supported by adult leaders and other kids in the program. And 95.45% agreed that 4-H shooting sports helps them see a positive future. So those youth are giving back, and they're learning, also learning as well. I just want to mention there are 4-H shooting sports youth. Most of them, as they get older in the 4-H shooting sports program and more experienced, will help younger youth, and that's typical throughout all of 4-H, but we see it a lot in 4-H shooting sports as well.
If people want to find out more information, how can they do that?
They can go to the Kansas 4-H website, which is kansas4-h.org, and go to 4-H projects, scroll down to natural resources, and once you're there, you'll see a shooting sports tab that you can click on.
Chandra, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you.
That was Kansas 4-H statewide shooting sports specialist Chandra Plate. I will link the resource that she mentioned in today's show notes on acttoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today. I'm Madeline Drake, in for Shelby Varner, and we continue our show with K-State's Brad White, Bob Larson, Phillip Lancaster, and special guest Billy Brown on the Beef Cattle Institute's Cattle Chat podcast.
We had a great listener question, and this one was from a listener that had been trying to really manage the calves on the cow. And he's providing a supplement to the cows. He's providing a supplement to the calves, creep feeding supplement. A calf that's about 3 months of age, sudden death, was diagnosed with Clostridium Prefingens C&D, or overeating. Bob, tell us a little bit about that disease.
Okay, so this is another one of the clostridial diseases. So a way that a lot of producers may be aware of this disease, it's one of the diseases that's protected against in a 7-way blackleg vaccine. Now, a lot of times we're thinking of blackleg, which is also a disease of these 2, 3, 4 months old calves. But overeating disease is another one of those. So Clostridium are bacteria that live in the soil. They're very hardy. Basically, we consider them to be everywhere. So every pasture is probably contaminated with some clostridial spores, and so the cattle can pick them up. So most cattle have them in their digestive tract all the time. The problem comes in is the Prefingens, the C&D that we see. It's called overeating disease because it appears that when calves have large meals, So it's often associated with herds that do a lot of things well, such as high milking females. So a calf whose dam milks pretty heavy level, he's probably at a little bit more risk to consuming enough rapidly fermentable feed, carbohydrates, that he could have that overgrowth, and then that toxin is produced by that bacteria. So it's a frustrating disease.
So a couple of thoughts there looking at the question. This happens in the intestine, right? This doesn't happen in the rumen.
That's correct.
So milk may be a little bit more, especially with a 2.5 or 3 month old calf, we're kind of still at pretty good milk production, and he's probably not eating a ton of creep feed. So one of the things I'm thinking from this question is we've had really good rains this spring. He's probably got some really good grass. He's been supplementing his cows as well. I bet he's got some really good milking cows this year. It may not be the creep feed that they're suggesting is the culprit in the question. It may be that the cows are producing a lot more milk than normal, and that's just one of the things that tipped him over.
I think that's possible. And that's one of the things that makes this disease so frustrating, is that a lot of times the textbook story is it's one of my better doing calves. He's from a cow that milks really well. He's a little bit older. He's really consuming. He's doing what we want him to do, which is grow fast, consume a lot of feed. And that feed is mostly milk with a little bit of grass. And that's the calf that gets sick. So it's just so frustrating because our typical things of, well, this isn't a sanitation problem. Calves don't catch it from other calves. They don't catch it from a dirty environment. It is a unintended consequence of selecting for high milk, high growth, high intake of calves, and a certain number of them can have this problem.
But relatively rare, sporadic. And Billy, I know you've got some experience with this as well.
Sure, yeah. With University of Wisconsin, when I was doing my postdoc there, we were running a research project on Holstein calves, their university research herd. And out of the 50-something calves, I think we had 7 or 12 calves that would present with this, so quite a number of calves. And why it was more prevalent there, I'm not totally sure. But again, we're looking at the milk. And, these calves are fed milk twice per day, so they're getting a big load. Is there some overflow into the rumen? What does that look like? But we were able to give some antitoxin, I think, to help resolve that. The big advantage being there that we see those calves twice per day. We're monitoring their feed intake. So it's not something where we go back out the next day and we have a calf that's been through the whole disease process with that.
Yeah, very, very different than on the cow-calf scenario where we're not closely monitoring their intake and we may not see it until later in the process. So a challenging disease. I would commend for the producer that sent in this question, nice job going ahead and get the necropsy. Go ahead and figure out what's causing it so that you have some idea to prepare for next time. As we said, there's no solid prevention that's going to prevent all cases, but I think worth taking a look at.
Once again, that was part of the Beef Cattle Institute's Cattle Chat podcast with Brad White, Bob Larson, Phillip Lancaster, and special guest Billy Brown. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.